Have you ever wondered why, despite doing everything right, being kind, listening deeply, loving sincerely, you still end up the one left behind? She says you're too good, then walks away with someone who couldn't care less about her feelings. That moment isn't just painful. It shakes the very foundation of your self-worth. But the truth is, you didn't lose because you weren't good enough. You lost because you didn't understand the rules of the game. Love doesn't follow logic, and women don't love with reason. They love through feeling. The kind of feeling not every man has the strength to stir. This video isn't for those seeking tricks to get the girl. It's a journey of awakening, where we shed illusions and learn to understand others more deeply. By first understanding ourselves. If you're ready to abandon blindness, ready to face truths that are hard to hear, but capable of transforming how you live, love, and exist, then watch until the end. Because after this, you will no longer be the man you once were. 1. It's emotion that holds her, not who you are. In romantic relationships, especially between men and women, there's an overlooked truth that governs much of human behavior. A woman doesn't love a man because he deserves to be loved. She doesn't choose him based on a checklist of logical reasons, like education, income, appearance, or moral character. While these factors may matter early on, long-term attachment isn't sustained by who he is, but by how he makes her feel. Behavioral psychology and neuroscience both affirm this. Most human decisions aren't made by reason, but by emotion, especially in women. The female brain tends to process information with emotional sensitivity, prioritizing present emotional states over logic. This doesn't mean women are irrational. It means that in matters of the heart, feeling outweighs analysis. Thus, a man's words and actions won't be measured by their objective correctness, but by the emotions they evoke: excitement, calm, intrigue, frustration, fatigue. That's why many men who do everything right still lose the women they love. They're kind, hardworking, emotionally available, and yet she loses interest and leaves. Not because he wasn't good enough, but because the emotional spark faded. His kindness failed to stir a strong enough emotional current to sustain connection. Meanwhile, another man, more distant, less expressive, perhaps even frustrating, may linger in her thoughts. Not because he's better, but because the emotional fluctuations he incites are deeper, more dynamic, keeping her mind entangled in a cycle she can't easily escape. Psychology calls this emotional resonance. When a man stirs deep emotional waves, a woman is more likely to form a profound connection. Like music layered with highs and lows, stillness and crescendo, it lingers longer than a flat, predictable tune. The emotional rhythm a woman experiences with you is that song. It needn't be perfect, but it must move, surprise, swell, and recede. Even more crucially, her emotional reactions often precede conscious thought. A glance, a pause, a tone of voice. These can trigger unconscious emotional responses that shape her behavior: attraction, withdrawal, curiosity, distance. She may not even know why. Hence the phrase, "I don't know why I like him," because her choice wasn't built on reason, but felt in the marrow of her being. Deeper still, emotion isn't only triggered by direct actions. It radiates from a man's internal state: confidence, calm, presence. A man with solid inner grounding emits a subtle energy that makes others feel secure, without needing to speak. His emotional state, centered, steady, transmits itself to the woman beside him and becomes part of her experience. This, more than anything, shapes lasting attachment. Conversely, explanation, persuasion, or reason rarely change outcomes. When a man fails in love and asks, "Why don't you love me anymore?" he's met with vague replies. "I don't know. I just don't feel the same." To him, it sounds unreasonable. But that's the nature of emotion. It doesn't follow logic. Love doesn't fade for lack of reasons. It fades because the emotional experience is no longer alive. So instead of obsessing over becoming a better version, according to social ideals, the essential question is, what kind of emotional experience are you creating in her? Do you make her feel intrigued, safe, understood, or bored, ignored, unseen? Every moment with you is etched into her memory by feeling, not logic. Within that context, a man who embodies depth, awareness, and emotional discipline, hallmarks of Stoicism, becomes rare and valuable, not because he says all the right things, but because he creates an atmosphere of safety, depth, and irreplaceability through sheer self-mastery. In love, people often evaluate others by obvious metrics: education, income, appearance, behavior, career. These form a kind of social resume, a summary of perceived value by conventional standards. Yet, when it comes to true attraction, especially from a woman's perspective, resumes, while helpful, are never decisive. Because love doesn't arise from a list of accomplishments. It's born from the emotional experience the other person creates. A woman doesn't stay in a relationship just because a man is worth loving in theory. She doesn't remain because he has a good job or a master's degree. Those facts might interest her at first, but to sustain inspiration, connection, and that special spark, a man must become part of her emotional journey, not a walking resume. In this case, experience means the emotional thread a man weaves through every interaction. It's how he makes her feel in each moment, while talking, in silence, during conflict, and even in stillness. Each encounter leaves a trace, not of facts, but of emotion. And those traces shape the emotional imprint she carries. In contrast, men who seek to prove their worth through quantifiable means, talking endlessly about what they have, what they've done, what they own, often lack the ability to generate rich emotional interaction or meaningful presence. They appear as polished profiles, neat, impressive, logical, but emotionally flat. They may be labeled good, yet fail to stand out in anyone's emotional memory. A man becomes an experience when he awakens layers of emotion in a woman: curiosity, safety, understanding, or simple peace. These experiences needn't be dramatic. They may lie in the way he listens, how he stays calm when provoked, or how he looks her in the eye with steady presence. Psychology shows that the human brain retains emotional information far more deeply than logical data. A kind gesture, a timely glance, a skilled understanding, these leave stronger marks on emotional memory than 100 self-descriptions ever could, especially in women with more sensitive emotional wiring. The imprint of feeling runs deeper than argument. This is why men who can master their emotions, remain fully present, and respond with clarity during emotional storms are often remembered as different or unforgettable. Not because they speak well, but because they offer a space of emotional stability and safety. This is vital in love, where emotion is ever shifting prone to amplification. The idea of emotional presence is widely acknowledged by psychologists as a key to deep connection. A man who is truly present, not distracted, not reactive, makes a woman feel seen, heard, and understood. These emotional states form a rich, lasting experience, more enduring than any other details she might remember about him. On the other hand, a man focused on how well he performs, whether he's worthy, or whether he's met the conditions for love, unwittingly turns the relationship into a transaction. She may notice his efforts, but feel nothing profound, because connection isn't built on effort alone, but on the quality of presence, how he shows up, the energy he carries, and whether his emotional grounding is strong enough to be a safe harbor. Therefore, what truly makes a woman choose to stay is not a list of accomplishments, but a feeling. I feel like myself when I'm with him. And that feeling cannot be manufactured through a resume. It flows only from a man with deep inner strength, grounded psychology, and the rare ability to connect through authentic presence. 2. The more accessible you are, the easier you are to dismiss. In relationships, one often overlooked pattern is the gradual loss of emotional spark and attraction when someone becomes too accessible, too eager, always present. What seems like devotion, even sacrifice, can, in truth, diminish one's perceived value in the eyes of the other. When a man makes himself available at all times, regardless of context, he unintentionally renders his presence ordinary in her perception. This is explained by what psychology calls the emotional scarcity effect, a fundamental human behavior wherein the value of something increases when it's rare and declines when it's constantly available. The mind naturally assigns greater worth to what's harder to reach. This holds true not just for goods, but especially in the emotional dynamics between men and women. When a man responds to messages instantly, initiates every conversation, rearranges his schedule at her slightest wish, or signals that he's always here, whenever you need, though well-intentioned, it deprives her of anticipation. The emotional charge is replaced by a surplus of safety, a lack of tension, a void of surprise, all of which are essential in the early alchemy of love. Furthermore, when a man adopts the posture of always available, this can be unconsciously interpreted as a lack of self-worth. Social psychology confirms people tend to value what requires effort to obtain. But when someone is endlessly reachable, easy to summon or command, he's perceived as lacking boundaries, as if nothing within him is sacred. And so, the mind begins to devalue what is always given. Biologically, the human brain responds sharply to controlled deprivation. It's why apps, games, and marketing use scarcity to preserve desire. Likewise, in a relationship, when a person maintains personal space, delays response, or isn't always there, they create a gap, a space in which the other begins to think, to wonder, to long. That gap is where emotion stirs, curiosity grows, and connection renews itself naturally. Overexposure leads to another reversal. Emotional dependency shifts. In a bond where one side clearly needs the relationship more, emotional balance collapses. A man who shows up uninvited, without reason, without limit, places himself in a position of lesser emotional power. The woman no longer feels the need to invest because there is no tension left to meet. Social behavior shows that unchecked accessibility breeds emotional habituation, the point at which the other, become so accustomed to your presence, they cease to feel its significance. Repetition, predictability, and excess dull emotional engagement. And where emotion dulls, connection wanes. There's also the issue of relative value. When a man offers time, energy, and attention without boundary, the woman may often subconsciously begin to ask, if he's of such worth, why is he always available? Doesn't he have anything else calling him? These questions are rarely spoken aloud, but they alter perception. What once inspired admiration begins to feel dispensable. All this reveals a simple but powerful truth. Even the most generous presence must be measured to preserve its weight. Understanding the psychological cost of being always ready allows a man to protect his value. A selective presence, calm demeanor, and deliberate pace create just enough distance to keep emotion vivid and presence cherished. In any relationship, especially in its formative stage, attraction arises not merely from appearance or facts, but from how people respond to the undefined. One essential ingredient in sustained emotional pull is unpredictability, not chaos, but subtle unpredictability. When someone becomes fully predictable in behavior, tone, or affection, emotional engagement flattens, and boredom begins its slow crawl. Biologically, the brain seeks and reacts to change, particularly emotional change. The nervous system, designed to detect novelty, gradually tunes out repetitive, harmless signals. This is emotional habituation. When kindness, care, or affection follows the same pattern, the emotional effect weakens. The other stops reacting, not out of indifference, but neurological adaptation. In relationships, if a man always reacts the same, expresses love with identical gestures, speaks in a script, his emotional presence fades. Women with more finely tuned emotional frequencies sense when the relationship enters routine. They may not resist outright, but their interest quietly withdraws. Their longing fades. One enduring force in emotional connection is variability, not instability, but nuanced emotional range. It doesn't mean endless change or dramatics. It means silence when needed, speech when it matters, care shown at chosen moments. A man who knows when to hold back and when to lean in brings a natural rhythm. No tricks, just awareness. Predictability also disrupts imagination and idealization in a woman's mind. When a man remains partly unreadable, she unconsciously fills in the gaps with her own projections, what psychology calls cognitive projection. This activates emotion. Every meeting becomes discovery. But when every thought, act, and word becomes familiar, imagination dies, and emotion with it. Moreover, predictability affects how inner value is perceived. In a world of instant access, simplicity grows stale. A man who exposes all of himself, no mystery, no restraint, becomes someone she already knows, no matter how kind he is. Meanwhile, depth, subtlety, and discretion preserve mystery, and with it, respect. On a behavioral level, predictability can resemble emotional dependence. When a man's every action or expression hinges on the woman's cues, always texting first, saying what's expected, doing what pleases, the dynamic collapses. The relationship becomes reflexive. He mirrors her mood rather than stands in his own, and the balance of energy shifts. One leads, one follows. This erodes attraction. So it becomes clear, emotional magnetism doesn't arise from doing more, showing more, or giving more. It comes from how a man manages his emotional presence, enough to connect, but not so much that it dissolves mystery. The man who knows when to surprise, when to pause, when to stay silent, sustains emotional clarity. This mastery of rhythm is what gives a relationship depth, keeping it alive instead of dull and flattened. 3. Kindness without boundaries is surrender. In a romantic relationship, kindness is a quality often praised and admired, especially in early stages of connection. However, when kindness lacks inner strength and self-direction, it gradually loses its value and may be seen as a sign of weakness, emotional dependency, or lack of personal agency. This becomes particularly evident in relationships between men and women, where emotional balance, the need for safety, and inner stability play key roles in creating lasting attraction. Many men believe that if they are kind enough, caring enough, always helpful, and never do anything to hurt their partner, they will be loved and cherished. This belief is reinforced by cultural archetypes of the ideal man, always available, always listening, always self-sacrificing. But in reality, this kindness, when detached from a strong personal foundation, can quickly be perceived as pliability. When a man offers unconditional and constant kindness without limits or clear standards, it may be misunderstood as a bid for external validation, specifically the approval of the woman he pursues. Behavioral psychology describes this as a form of social approval seeking. A person who constantly strives to be liked often acts based on the desire for acceptance rather than grounded personal values. In love, this is seen in a man willing to do anything to please his partner, even when it goes against his needs, emotions, or principles. He might apologize even when he's done nothing wrong, agree to everything to avoid conflict, or constantly seek positive feedback just to feel he's doing the right thing. However, from a woman's perspective, such behavior is not always interpreted as genuine love or commendable kindness. Rather, if she perceives that a man is willing to sacrifice his selfhood for acceptance, she may feel he lacks emotional backbone and cannot stand on his own. This erodes respect and eventually attraction. It's not that women don't value kindness, they do. But kindness without strength fails to create the sense of safety and solidity required for emotional attachment. One unconscious function in any relationship is the allocation of emotional roles. A woman with her intricate emotional structure and intuitive sensitivity often looks for someone who can act as an anchor during periods of psychological turbulence. If the man lacks internal steadiness and instead reacts to her emotions with submission or anxiety, the relationship loses balance. In such cases, he no longer serves as an emotional anchor, but becomes dependent on her emotional signals to guide his own behavior. This creates a distorted emotional model in which the woman ends up bearing the emotional weight for both, an unsustainable role over time. Emotional closeness fades, not due to a lack of affection, but because the man's psychological state no longer conveys reliability or strength. Moreover, when kindness is displayed repeatedly, indiscriminately, and without boundaries, it becomes an expectation rather than a gesture. The more predictable an action is, the less emotional response it elicits. When all acts of kindness follow a fixed pattern, the other person stops feeling surprise or emotional movement, both vital to maintaining vitality in emotional connection. When kindness becomes something expected, it is no longer seen as valuable, but as a bare minimum. One cannot ignore the influence of modern social and cultural environments where personal value is increasingly measured by autonomy and clearly defined limits. A man is admired not only for giving, but for knowing when to give and when to withhold. The inability to choose, especially under emotional pressure, makes kindness look more like a defensive maneuver than a sign of maturity. From every angle, it becomes clear that kindness only becomes powerful when backed by personal strength. Kindness without direction, boundaries, resilience, or the capacity to protect one's inner values cannot earn lasting respect. In love, where emotions and judgments are formed unconsciously and constantly, a woman seeks a man who is both kind and grounded. When one of these traits is missing, especially the latter, kindness loses its weight and can even be mistaken for weakness. In any relationship, especially romantic ones, respect and attraction are not maintained by emotion alone, but also by clear personal boundaries. These boundaries are not coldness or distance, but healthy limits that protect inner value, maintain balance, and prevent emotional overreach on either side. When a man fails to show boundaries or consistently allows others to violate his limits on time, emotion, or principles, it diminishes not only his own well-being, but also how much he is respected or desired. Relationship psychology shows that people tend to respect those who can protect themselves, not just physically, but emotionally. A person without boundaries is often recognized by behaviors such as always agreeing, avoiding conflict, accommodating every demand, even unreasonable ones, and being unable to say no, even at the cost of their own time or energy. In romantic contexts, if a man persists in such behavior, the woman will feel that a crucial emotional anchor is missing because he does not protect or define his own emotional space. Emotional value lies not only in providing pleasure or romance, but in conveying that one's inner world is structured, firm, and not easily penetrated. When a man gives up his personal boundaries, canceling plans at the last minute, shifting his values to avoid disagreement, or tolerating disrespect without resistance, his initial appeal fades. The woman no longer sees him as a distinct individual, but as a reflection of her own desires and emotions. This loss of boundaries leads not only to diminished respect, but to emotional imbalance. When one side constantly adapts just to please the other, the relationship stops being a balanced exchange and becomes one-directional. The man gradually loses his sense of self in her eyes. In such cases, his kindness is no longer seen as noble, but as weakness, fear of loss, or lack of self-mastery. The absence of boundaries creates a vicious emotional loop. The man feels exhausted from constantly accommodating, yet fears expressing fatigue or discontent, lest he upset her. Meanwhile, she senses that he has nothing left to discover or is too easy, and begins to lose respect without fully understanding why. Over time, both feel suffocated, one in silent endurance, the other in quiet boredom. Another critical factor is how boundaries unconsciously shape power dynamics. In any intimate bond, each person still needs a degree of personal space to feel autonomous. When a man cannot demonstrate this independence, when he lacks the basic ability to claim time for himself, to say no, or to withdraw from disrespect, he silently hands over control of his emotions and behavior to the other. This skews the balance of power and erodes the natural equilibriums of the relationship. From a behavioral standpoint, a man with clear boundaries radiates steadiness and trustworthiness. He doesn't react impulsively, isn't easily swayed by emotional turbulence, and holds his ground when needed. In contrast, a man without boundaries signals instability, easily affected, difficult to rely on in conflict. This undermines the sense of safety, a foundational component of lasting love. Boundaries also help preserve long-term attraction by fostering mutual respect. When a woman sees that the man beside her holds to his principles, keeps his space, and cannot be easily controlled, she adapts accordingly. This creates a responsible, reciprocal connection. But when every limit is blurred, and every behavior is tolerated without question, instinct leads her to invest less, because commitment is no longer earned, and emotion no longer sharpened by friction. In the end, boundaries are not barriers, but the invisible structure that keeps a relationship alive with respect and attraction. When a man lacks the ability to set and uphold boundaries, he forfeits the image of inner solidity, a quality women seek not just to fall in love, but to remain committed. Boundaries are not distance. They are the very ground on which enduring connection is built. 4. People fall in love with what they imagine, not what they fully understand. In the early stages of a relationship, when two people don't fully know each other, attraction often doesn't come from a complete understanding, but from the gaps in what's known. These gaps allow the imagination to stir. Rather than wait for clarity, the mind fills in the blanks, creating images and emotions from scattered signals, appearance, voice, demeanor, glances, and small reactions. This is a common psychological effect known as cognitive projection. When information is lacking, people assign traits they hope or long for. In love, this becomes even stronger because it ties into deep emotional circuitry. When a woman meets a calm, quiet, seemingly mysterious man, she may begin to imagine depth, leadership, experience, even though he hasn't shown any of these directly. Initial attraction, then, isn't rooted in reality. It's built on an idealized version the mind constructs. This version isn't confirmed by fact, but formed by assumptions, desires, and emotional patterns. When a woman thinks of the man, it's not about what he said or did. It's about how he made her feel, the possibilities he represents, the mystery that invites discovery. That uncertainty becomes the fuel for emotional engagement. On the other hand, when a man reveals too much too quickly, sharing personal details, feelings, philosophies, or constantly affirming himself verbally, he disrupts this process of projection. The other person's mind has no room left to imagine or idealize, because every gap has been filled with data. With nothing left to uncover, the emotional tension flattens and often fades. From a neurological view, the brain is wired to respond strongly to uncertainty. When something is undefined, the prefrontal cortex, responsible for expectation, anticipation, and motivation, activates intensely. This creates emotional energy, suspense, and psychological richness. A man who holds something back, who doesn't fully expose himself, stimulates this region, making every interaction feel like a new puzzle piece. And the process of completing that puzzle is the emotional journey a woman wants to continue. But once the image is completed too soon, the brain no longer invests energy in the relationship. Emotional arousal drops. What once excited now becomes familiar. And as the emotional response declines, so does the sense of connection. This explains why some relationships burn brightly at first, but quickly cool. Not because anyone changed, but because the attraction was built on an imagined ideal that couldn't be sustained. The wider the gap between fantasy and reality, the sharper the disappointment. The woman doesn't pull away because he worsened, but because he ceased to be who she thought he was. Holding something back at the start doesn't mean pretending or manipulating. It means honoring the emotional space of discovery. In any human bond, what keeps attention alive isn't what's known, but what remains to be understood. A man who doesn't rush to reveal his thoughts, habits, or emotional world keeps a sense of depth alive in the other's perception. That depth isn't measured in how long you talk, but in the imaginative space your silence leaves. In love psychology, researchers call this the power of positive ambiguity. It's the state where someone is not so vague as to cause anxiety, but not so clear as to leave nothing to imagine. This ambiguous space is where emotion grows strongest. We don't love what we understand. We love what we can dream about. All this points to a deeper truth. Love, especially early love, doesn't run on logic or evidence, but on the emotional tension born of the undefined. Imagination isn't just a filler of gaps. It's the very engine of desire, curiosity, and emotional investment. And in this context, measured ambiguity isn't a tactic. It's a natural condition for emotional growth. In both the creation and maintenance of attraction, the element of mystery, the not yet fully known, plays a key role. When a person becomes too predictable, too clearly mapped, emotional curiosity fades. This isn't irrational or sudden. It's the mind's normal response to diminished novelty and reduced emotional tension. Neurologically, the brain is programmed to react to novelty, uncertainty, and suggestion. When engaging with someone not yet fully known, the prefrontal cortex, the seat of reasoning, forecasting, and imagination, activates strongly. This fuels attention, heightens emotion, and keeps the spirit of discovery alive. It's a natural mechanism that helps humans invest in relationships that are still unfolding. But when a man quickly discloses everything, his personality, thoughts, feelings, habits, and patterns, the woman's internal process of imagination is cut short. What once created excitement is now explained. When every question is answered, every facet laid bare, the emotional state shifts from discovery to confirmation, and confirmation rarely sustains desire, like anticipation does. This is closely related to emotional adaptation. When someone experiences the same emotional pattern repeatedly, the nervous system dulls its response. Similarly, if a man becomes emotionally repetitive, always reacting the same way, always offering the same attention, never surprising, her emotional system goes flat. The affection may remain, but the emotional depth lessens. The mind stops being fed. Another key factor is the decline in the drive to explore. In any relationship, the desire to discover more is a central motivator of emotional effort. When the image of the man becomes too fixed, leaving nothing left to guess, no story left to unfold, the inner engine of curiosity stalls. Without a reason to explore further, emotional investment halts. She no longer feels the need to know him more, and thus, connection no longer deepens. Moreover, When the image becomes too clear, it loses dimensionality. A man who only shows his best sides or builds a flawless persona may come off as inauthentic. People experience depth through complexity. The way someone handles adversity, their calm in conflict, their unpredictability. If a man always behaves by the book, never falters, never causes reflection or doubt, he becomes emotionally flat. Attraction doesn't arise from perfection. It arises from selective truth, from strength, shown alongside mystery. Finally, emotional fading occurs when a relationship becomes fully predictable. When a woman can foresee every one of a man's responses, whether in joy, anger, or pain, there is no longer a reason to stay emotionally invested. This reduces the emotional rhythm of the relationship. Instead of passing through excitement, serenity, tension, and relief, the dynamic flattens into something linear, without rise or fall. This doesn't mean the man did anything wrong. He may still be kind, loyal, giving, and sincere. But the issue isn't personal, it's neurological. Once the image becomes too defined, too complete, emotional connection struggles to evolve, simply because there's no longer room for imagination and emotional projection. In conclusion, the formation and sustenance of romantic feeling depend, in part, on the unknown. When one's image is presented too clearly, too early, the woman is no longer moved by what might be, only by what already is. And when emotion shifts from movement to stillness, from wonder to certainty, the connection slips from emotional depth into static comfort. 5. A steady anchor is what makes a woman stay. In the psychology of relationships, one of the most fundamental elements behind a woman's long-term attachment is emotional safety. This is not an abstract notion, but a state that forms when a woman feels her moods, emotions, and vulnerability can be received with calm, not judged or exploited. Contrary to the popular image of pampering or pleasing, this sense of safety doesn't arise from submission or constant agreement. It comes from emotional self-mastery and the ability to remain steady in the face of her emotional turbulence. Many men believe that agreeing with everything a woman says, never pushing back, always trying to please her, will earn them love and respect. Yet this approach often backfires. When a man abandons his principles to maintain harmony, avoids disagreement, and acts as if she is always right, he unwittingly erodes the very trust she might place in him. Submission does not communicate strength or dependability. It suggests a man who is easily swayed and directionless in conflict. In contrast, a man who stays calm when she is angry, who doesn't overreact to criticism, and who knows how to listen without being pulled into emotional chaos, is the one who radiates stability and reliability. In psychology, this is known as emotional grounding, the capacity to serve as an emotional anchor. Such a man doesn't get dragged into negativity. He creates a space of calm where a woman can show her raw emotions without fear of punishment or manipulation. Emotional safety is not a mere desire to feel good. It is a biological requirement for women to open up, bond, and remain connected. When the nervous system detects that the other person is not a threat, doesn't overreact, manipulate, or impose, the limbic system, the brain's emotional core, permits the deeper state of connection to be activated. The woman then feels free to express herself without needing to brace or suppress her truth. Another key point is how a man responds when the woman is emotionally unsteady. At times, she may fall into stress, anxiety, emotional fragility, or insecurity without a clear cause. In these moments, she doesn't need advice, solutions, or submission. What she needs is someone who stays, who doesn't panic, who doesn't raise his voice, and who doesn't turn the moment into his own issue. His calm presence, more than any specific action, is what makes her feel protected. A common dynamic in imbalanced relationships is when a man gets pulled into her emotional spiral. When she's upset, he becomes defensive, mirrors her emotions, or resorts to appeasement. But neither approach fosters long-term safety. Defensiveness escalates conflict. Appeasement creates emotional dependency. True safety arises when the man remains stable. He doesn't flee, argue, or make grand promises. He simply stays steady, signaling, "You're allowed to be unsteady, and I won't fall apart." The difference between submission and safety lies in self-control. The submissive man acts out of fear of losing her, of not being accepted, or of facing disapproval. But the grounded man knows that setting boundaries, remaining calm, and letting emotions pass is what protects both people from unconscious destruction. It's undeniable that women desire to be seen, cared for, and loved. But beyond that, what makes them stay is not who spoils them more, but who lets them be vulnerable without being pushed away. And that only happens when the man isn't swayed by temporary emotions, isn't ruled by a need to please, and instead holds steady, so she can regulate her own feelings within the space he protects. This analysis shows that submission might yield short-term satisfaction, but it lacks the depth needed for lasting connection. Emotional safety, built from calm, consistency, and self-possession, is what allows women to open their hearts, to stay, even when the relationship hits difficult terrain. In building and maintaining romantic connection, one foundational, yet often overlooked element is inner self-control. This is not just about surface-level behavior, but the inner stillness that keeps a man from being pulled by other people's emotions, reacting impulsively, or needing external validation to feel worthy. For women, this quality unconsciously draws them in and ultimately makes them stay. This self-control manifests in many ways. A grounded man doesn't react hastily to criticism, doesn't need to explain himself constantly, and doesn't feel threatened by differing views. Instead, he maintains composure, observes, and acts without betraying his core. In a world of emotional chaos, the person who remains centered becomes a quiet force of emotional gravity. Psychologically, people bond with those who bring them emotional balance, not those who always make them happy, but those who don't make things worse. When a woman goes through anxiety, frustration, or disappointment, she instinctively evaluates whether the man beside her soothes or magnifies those emotions. The man with inner mastery doesn't overreact, doesn't escalate, doesn't rush to fix her. He allows her feelings to exist without letting them dictate his own. This not only makes her feel safe, but it earns her respect. In the emotional realm, the person who can remain calm amid uncertainty becomes the most attractive. There's no need to assert strength, no need to prove anything, simply not collapsing. That quiet strength is what inspires trust and admiration. Furthermore, self-control also means maintaining healthy distance from others' emotions. A man who doesn't let someone else's mood dictate his behavior doesn't get trapped in the cycle of pleasing, fearing loss, and overcompensating. He listens, he empathizes, but he doesn't lose himself. This clarity maintains long-term attraction because the woman feels she cannot manipulate or reshape him at will. Behavioral psychology also shows attraction doesn't stem from someone always meeting your expectations, but from someone who remains themselves, even when it doesn't align with your hopes. This creates consistency, and consistency builds trust. The more a man stays rooted in his identity, the less he's shaken by chaos, the more she feels, I can lean on him, and he won't fall. Self-control also means not needing others' approval to feel worthy. A man like this doesn't require compliments to feel successful, attention to feel seen, or a partner's presence to feel whole. He is emotionally autonomous, and that independence creates freedom in connection. The woman senses he's here because he chooses to be, not because he must, and that deepens the bond beyond anything appearances can offer. The opposite is the man ruled by emotion, quick to anger, easily jealous, always needing reassurance. This not only burdens the woman, it slowly erodes her respect. When a man cannot contain himself, he becomes an emotional liability, not an anchor. And once the relationship is governed by insecurity, attraction gives way to exhaustion. From all this we see, inner mastery is not rare, but it is rarely cultivated in love. A man may possess many external qualities, wealth, charm, appearance, but if he lacks emotional steadiness, those things fade quickly. But if a man knows how to hold his center through storms, his presence becomes not only attractive in the moment, but a lasting current in the woman's awareness. If there's one lesson I've taken from everything shared, it's this. In love, we don't need to strive to become perfect in someone else's eyes. We need to learn how to become grounded within ourselves. Life today makes it all too easy to lose direction. We're pushed to be kind, accommodating, predictable, lovable, to the point that we sometimes forget that real value lies in maintaining boundaries and inner composure. I once fell into the same trap. Many do, trying to do everything just to be loved, to remain in someone's life. But it was in those moments when I struggled to prove I was worthy that I felt most fragile, not in someone else's eyes, but in my own emotions. Only later did I realize that a woman doesn't need a perfect man. What she needs is an anchor, a place where she can exhale, fall apart, and come back to herself, without fear of judgment or control. We cannot control how others feel, but we can control the energy we bring into a relationship. And sometimes, simply learning to be still, steady, unreactive, unmoved by the vague, is enough to create a deeper pull than any technique of seduction. Everything starts within. If something in this message resonated with you, give this video a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss more content on Stoicism and the art of emotional mastery in love. And if there's one final truth to hold on to, true strength isn't about trying to control everything. It's about remaining unmoved by anything. See you in the next video.